Hi, Ryan. Hey, come on. How you feeling your schedule? Oh, you're. No, I had some stuff. And so I was like, we'll get it together.
I didn't drop my lunch because I was trying to eat better, and I was like, nah, I don't want to eat it. I wanted to eat it. I'm part of that.
Awesome.
I just like today, I was like, this is it. Today's gonna be the day I eat better. And I was like, well, I did.
Oh, yours? You had a cure soda? Because I don't have any cure soda yet. You know, like,
Oh, look, I mean, it was literally like right here. It's a big sweet to us.
oh, that's yours. Yeah, you had it yesterday instead.
Oh, you did? Okay, I'll bring it to you. It's in my.
I lost my VCU thermos one, like I left it in photo freeze for like half a year. Yeah, I'm confident so
Somebody else
VCU
had it.
one now. But it was not on that. I kept forgetting that they were always in like.
Yeah, everything. I really like Tokyo, but I'm not knowing it.
I know.
Yeah, I need to put actual like things on calendars.
Yeah.
Regular.
Yeah, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That was terrible.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was
I'm
fun
hoping
down there.
she was trying
Sessions.
You know, not bad.
Okay.
I definitely went to pretty much whatever. Yeah, it was good. It was great.
So Tokyo was your
Yeah, it's like so. Just because I like. I mean, yeah, I think it was all nice. I mean, it's so hard to say. I mean, we did we did Kobe, Kochi, Hiroshima. That's Busan. That was cool. I mean, it was that was neat for sure. Very somber.
Before 11:30.
Yeah, a whole lot of
Yes, I guess something's profound for your statement. I'm like.
Yes, You got to come up with something good.
Yeah. Yesterday.
Yeah.
I was just thinking. That's right, I don't know.
So where's next?
Not big. I'm going. I've been wanting. No, I was actually going to do a game. I'm going to do an all game. I'm going to back in weekends, but then it got too expensive. All of my time. I mean, it was months and months ago.
10:30.
Already booked.
Just that is not that. And then I'm just like, good luck. After lunch.
This way, maybe we should reverse it. Now, like, first all game weekends. Flipped it. And then they were both actually out of town. They actually had away games, and so it's much cheaper. And so I really just wanted to go by, check out practice, check out the stadium. We're doing Birmingham, Mobile, I mean, all the other stuff. Haven't done those.
That's probably hot.
Trying not, we're not.
It's time.
It's time to get started.
I'm going to go ahead and set a custom one right here.
We'll try to get started on time. So thank you guys for coming to our first Lunch and Learn session for the summer. I have some session evaluation sheets on the back table there, if you don't mind. We appreciate the feedback. So I'm going to introduce Katie Shedden, who is our newest member of our FarmTech group, who's going to be talking with you about some different tools that can be used for engagement in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And I'll let Katie introduce herself a little further as she kind of goes into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So if everyone just came in, if you want to go ahead and answer, let me make sure it's answer the question about what you're hoping to learn today, just so you can get a good idea of what everybody's expectations are coming in. Bend tenders down. Yeah, if you guys are able to, you can join on your computer or you can join via text. So it should be, let me make sure it's all active. Yeah, it's not showing up for me. 1 second. So this is awesome that we get to talk about this. So Poll Everywhere requires an add-in on Google Slides to function. And unfortunately, this computer does not have it, which is something that we're working on at the moment across all our classrooms. Lauren and I tested out in the other classrooms the other day. So good learning moment. We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you guys all for coming out to the session. Hope we can talk through a few interactive ways to kind of engage with learners. So I wanted to make this oriented towards faculty and staff as well, thinking about training opportunities, as well as classroom opportunities to think about different courses and how you can use the tools that VCU already provides and has access to in the classrooms to kind of leverage engagement. So sort of a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from. So I've been in School of Pharmacy for a little over a month. I grew up in Goshen, Virginia on an alpaca farm. So that's me when I'm like 10 with my little what is an alpaca board. So that was kind of one of my first interactions with education and coming at it from the perspective of a 10-year-old who just scooped alpaca poop all summer and is super excited to tell you about what alpacas are, because a lot of people didn't know, as well as maybe people who come from different places don't have interactions with animals, livestock, farming, and what that is. So kind of translating that, my own experiences to other people that I got to interact with at the state fair. So I also went to JMU for communication studies, undergrad and grad school for communication and advocacy. So I kind of come from a background that's more so interdisciplinary. I worked in the IT help desk at JMU as well, so I kind of had that IT experience. My dad was actually a programmer, so I kind of get involved early on. So I got to teach a couple courses as a graduate student. I taught some introductory speech courses, and that was kind of my interest in. I really enjoy teaching. I really love working with students, and that was kind of my first experience where I was really on my own in the classroom trying to figure out what works, what doesn't really work. So kind of combining the technology and instruction. All right, so today we're going to talk about promoting learner engagement with technology, specifically microlearning and how technology kind of assists with that, as well as Google Apps, Kaltura, and Poll Everywhere. So we'll kind of work around the Poll Everywhere add-in. That's okay, we can figure that out. I'm also going to be accepting questions through Google Slides. I'll go ahead and activate that now, which should be working out for me. So you can go ahead and present from here. So if anyone has any questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and send any questions in there and I'll be able to pop them up as they come through. All right, so yeah, I don't want to focus too much on why engagement matters because I think everyone's fairly on board with active learning engagement, so I've been told. So surprise, surprise, students do not continuously pay attention throughout a 50-minute lecture or longer, so 3-hour lectures, labs, whatever the situation may be. So thinking about how we can leverage other tools to also engage with learners. So thinking about, lectures are one component of that, but then also, so how do we leverage interacting with students, discussions, activities, walkthroughs, demonstrations, to also teach critical thinking, discussion, sort of those higher level objectives that information transfer alone doesn't provide. So I want to introduce the concept of microlearning, which is something that's kind of, well, it's not a new concept, but it's kind of an emerging trend in HR training and how to engage with. So every time we have to go through and upload our information about our healthcare plans, how do we remind people or how do we train people how to do that using different systems? It's something that's also emerging in conjunction with e-learning and technology in the classroom. So microlearning is learning that takes place in a series of small steps to help drive a new understanding of how learning and education take place outside of established and traditional arenas of education. Just to give one definition, there are many out there, and coming to a conclusion on exactly what it is always challenging. But that's just to give you a kind of an overview of these sort of bite-sized piece of information approaching learning as a step-by-step, small bits of information kind of approach. And this image is linked, and we'll send out the lecture materials or session materials afterwards so you can access all that information. But it's linked to an article that kind of discusses micro-learning as this experience design, so moving away from even instructional design and thinking about the learner experience and what it means to be a lifelong learner, if we're talking about future of a pharmacist, et cetera. And continuous reinforcement, so having, even in micro-learning, it's not necessarily just these little bites of information, but we are repeating that and reinforcing that information over time. He's talking about how most of the instruction we see fits into either the micro-learning or macro-learning category, although these things are obviously pretty interrelated. So micro-learning being, I need help. I ran into this IT problem, and the first thing I'm going to do is probably Google it and look through 3 or 4 articles. And then macro-learning being more like something like a Lynda course, LinkedIn Learning. You're going through a series of modules at a time. And thinking about how can we incorporate micro-learning in these macro-learning kind of experiences. So how does technology kind of leverage that concept? So technology can give us more access to more flexible ways of learning, so giving learners multiple options if they want to go through a review at their own pace, if they want to go through a series of short videos about certain concepts. Also gives instructors a little bit more flexibility if you want to do something like a flipped classroom, provide office hours in a different format. Also promotes the interactivity. So with something like the Google Slides audience question, you're able to then see in real time what points students are struggling with, similar to something like Poll Everywhere. Also provides opportunities for reinforcement, so on a student's own time, or sort of different modes of engagement with things like videos or the active discussion components that technology can provide, which we'll kind of get into as we go through the different options. So teacher self-communities is something that I also came across when I was learning about micro-learning and kind of the root of where did this concept come from and how are people talking about it. So one example that I found that I just love because I think it's adorable is, so this one over here for you, it's the left. So these are 3 8th graders who were working in a classroom over the span of about 4 months with a software program to help 3D print a leg for this duck, this one-legged duck. So they were implementing these micro-learning ideas about how do we then solve this problem. So they've never used the software. They were given these tools and then the students themselves had to kind of figure out, I think they used mostly YouTube to see which different software, different kinds of plastic are going to work well for this duck's leg. And apparently now they're working on a chicken's leg, so that's exciting. And so another example that comes to mind for me in my own life, if you see my moped like Chris has, because we're moped buddies, so this is my moped Winona. She got stolen in Richmond, RIP, miss you. I know, she was my number one. If you click on the photo, it'll take you to a YouTube video that I used to learn. So my moped had been off for probably like a month. And I was like, this thing won't start. What do I do? I've tried sitting here, turning the ignition, and it's making this noise, but it sounds really bad. So then I went and found, okay, you can actually hold down a component of the moped, choke it, and turn it on. Chris, you know what I'm talking about? Yep, okay. So I went to YouTube. I was like, okay, that was me micro-learning. I went and found this YouTube video, and I think it's just kind of a part of our lives that we don't necessarily recognize that we're doing or realize is a component of everyday learning, but then creates this kind of space where so for example, so the first thing I was like, all right, I know there are online communities that love talking about my new moped, this is Starbucks, about how to mod this particular type of moped. It's really popular for that reason. So there are online communities on Reddit who are talking about, oh, this is the way that I've changed, lowered the seat or whatever it might be, that are then these social learning and information spaces to help people kind of come together and create these new kinds of knowledges. I thought those were good examples to kind of figure out, okay, what does microlearning actually look like, and that we all probably do it. So before we really get started with going through all the different tools, I wanted to take a moment, if everyone wanted to pull out a phone or make a note on a piece of paper or a note on your computer, whatever works best for you, and think about a few of these questions. If you want to just answer one or two, I'll give you about 2 minutes to think about. It's kind of an exercise that I just wanted everyone to take a minute to think about, can this session really do for me today? Are there some problems that I'm running into in my classroom or in a training exercise or in my respective department that I think we could be doing better, and use this to potentially give you some ideas to kind of jump off and then implement later on. So you can think about, maybe there's assignment in your course that you want to do that you don't feel like is super engaging, and you want to try and find ways to engage with learners that way. So I'll put up a timer for you guys. Probably gives you guys about like 30-ish seconds. All right. Okay, so today, as far as the Google apps we're going to get into, is using some of the Google Slides Q&A function, and seeing how you can kind of get that live interaction with your audience, your students at a conference, at a training. etc., and some ideas for implementing that tool. And then as well as Google Jockeying, which isn't a tool necessarily, it's more of a concept, but there's a way to kind of incorporate some Google apps to support that idea as well. So I got this great question from Laura asking me, how do I turn on the Q&A in Google Slides? Great question. Awesome. So you guys can see, super straightforward, which is awesome, simple, not a lot can go wrong. So you just, under present here, go to presenter view. So you can present with your Q&A and your speaker notes, and it'll give you a pop-up window. So if you do have pop-ups blocked, that might potentially be a problem to be aware of. So then it'll show you here your speaker notes if you have any notes underneath your slides, what's coming up. You can also kind of navigate here. You can also see the timer if you want to see how long you're taking on a particular slide. And if you like really want these huge. So my note to myself is keeping this general window out of the general view of everyone. So after I show you guys the audience tools, just knowing that if you're sharing your screen or if your screen's up here, people can see that. So here you can either continue recent. So I'm going to continue one that I started earlier. Oh, maybe not that one. There we go. And then you can see it'll pop up with, you have the URL here that people can send messages into that'll appear at the top of the screen, as well as your incoming questions so that you can see them over on your side of the screen here. And people can also upvote these questions, and you can, so like I showed you earlier when Laura had this question, you can then present the question so everyone else can see it and who also submitted it.
I think that would be important for students to realize is that other people can see their questions.
Yeah, right.
And they can, but that's also good because then
Good and bad, yes.
it's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
So don't be silly and writing silly things. But if someone has already put in a question similar to yours, the students can just upvote that so that you don't get duplicates of the same kind of question.
But you can ask question anonymously here, yeah?
You can.
Mm-hmm.
The students, yeah, put the questions in, and then you can see. So the way Katie has it is basically her slides are on one screen, and then that Q&A box is on the other screen. So you can kind of see as you're presenting with the two screens. You can follow the questions are coming in. But the students, if they're logged into this, can also see the questions while they're coming in as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it in
Yeah,
if you check like the box, like so I've told students in consumption before, like they do not want their name to pop up in the question, you just click the box. That way
Right.
they're not embarrassed when I'm presenting.
Yeah, I didn't want to be embarrassed, but I'm already embarrassed because I did not check this window. But I even don't know how to get to your slides. Okay, so my question is, how do I get to your slides?
So we are going to share, I believe, through the Blackboard site, so everyone will have access to the slides.
Is it Blackboard?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But I thought that they were saying you go to the Google Drive and you should see your slides. You don't. So, okay, so I didn't do anything.
You haven't missed anything.
You're good to go. Also, yeah. And if you guys want to stop me at any point, if you feel like this is content that you already know, or if you have a content-specific question, just informal, let me know, catch my attention, and we can focus on that. All right, so yeah, just as kind of an overview of, there are lots of ways you can use this as far as engagement is concerned. So using it to break up instruction, saying, okay, it looks like 3 or 4 people seem to have this common point of confusion. You can put up this question and have people either review, discuss, something other than just talking at or lecturing to kind of change the flow of the presentation or the learning environment. And yeah, the upvoting feature is really useful for that as well. as well as providing feedback for points of confusion. So it can be difficult to gauge if students don't understand, if they're just kind of passively listening, as opposed to when you can see, okay, I have 4 or 5 people that are saying, I don't really understand what you just said in this past section, then you can kind of focus on that or make it maybe a topic for next time.
Okay, is it easy to see when people submit questions? I mean, are you seeing it pop up there?
Yep, it'll show you in here. You can kind of scroll, but it'll pop up. Yeah, you can see it pretty instantaneously. So the next concept that I wanted to talk about was Google jockeying. So to define that, so we got a link as well, you can check out the PDF, is basically designating a student or a group of students during the lecture to actively search the internet for related material. So they're actively looking for content that's related to class time. There were examples where students did this on their own laptops, and also examples where they hooked up, whoever was the Google jockey hooked up their own computer, or you could use like a Zoom call to share their screen. So they're putting up content that's relevant to others that might be supporting what is being talked about. So this does create some opportunities for dialogue. So if there are some relevant examples that a student was able to locate and then project, we could take a moment to talk about that, as well as using it to compile course resources. So if you wanted to break off into groups and say, okay, let's think about creating a wiki or like a Google Sheets Excel document that everyone can reference that is about this lecture for review, for example, as well as answering. So if you wanted to use this as a kind of like a Google jockey, if a student even was monitoring the questions that came up and wanted to highlight those, or presenting something like a problem-based learning example. So saying, okay, we're all going to split up and try and solve these problems, and then come together and see what we all came up with individually, and putting them in something like a Google Doc. So I linked a few examples there. So the first example had one student, and of course this won't work all the time for every lecture, and is more of kind of a supplementary, this is an option. You're thinking of an activity or a particular lecture that you had some idea, you've done a lecture a couple times, but I can't think of any other relevant articles that might be helpful or other supplementary images. Let's see maybe what students come up with, for example. You could use it in that way. So they were putting up images that were relevant to, it was more of a discussion point in that example. So if it's a lecture that is open to discussion, or something maybe about patient care, so there's more of an opportunity for like a case study, that might be a good time to use that. And the second example was, so they were compiling resources using Google Sheets. It was a K through 12 example. There are lots of very different applications that I noticed. And they were using Google Sheets. You could also do something like a course wiki, or using like Blackboard discussion boards to kind of add in relevant information there too. So you can use, like I mentioned before, different Google apps like Docs or Sheets to do this, as well as a tool like Poll Everywhere. So you can then crowdsource all that information live during a lecture to give more of that active, okay, if people are going to be on their phone or on their laptop anyway, they can then be engaging with the content as opposed to maybe looking somewhere else or drifting off. All right, so I had this great idea to do a Google jockey here. So in light of Poll Everywhere not helping me out, so I'm going to give you guys about 3 or 4 minutes. If you want to just group into 4 people that are closest to you, that seems to work out as a general rule. And if you guys want to see if you can find some examples of ways that other higher education institutions are implementing active learning principles, whether that's an exercise, maybe an academic journal. So if you want to throw in a link, you can find ways using kind of those Google jockey concepts in your groups and then submitting them here. I'll pull up something. Actually, go ahead and just submit them via the slides, the Google Slides link. And then we can kind of come back together and see what everybody found. Cool, does everybody get that? Generally? Brian, you look confused?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's up? So you guys can submit either way. If you've already submitted to the Google one, that's fine too.
They're your audience, right? Oh, so I think in ACJE, American Journal of Education, but I think it's interesting. I will say that we do that. And you had to be here. And then I'm sure.
Yes.
It just sounds like they were a little bit. That part is the Yeah, we had to look at that.
Source. There's no way to cite the data.
If you can just throw it in as a link, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to take them, right? So you want me to? I can do it.
You can do it in the poll everywhere one. Mhm.
Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome. All right, so we got a good number of ideas now if we want to come back together and take a look at some of them. So in a fairly short amount of time, we were able to get a pretty good number of different ideas. So we got some cool articles. Got the jigsaw method, which I had to Google because I've never heard of that before. So different teaching techniques, as well as some cool different articles about active learning. Were there any that you guys found that you were surprised by or interested by? Yeah.
We found one called Using Hand Signs to Teach HIV Medication, where they literally had the students write the names of meds on their fingers and then have them do different like shapes. At one point they're making W's and they each had like associated things with them, so it visually helps them sort of teaches them creepy gang signs. Just kidding. It's very like interesting, and they actually wrote on their hands and then tested if they like asked questions correctly.
Awesome. Just imagine them during the exam.
Awesome. Yeah, so you can then generate a report, which we'll talk about this a little bit later, show you exactly how you would do that. But since it wouldn't allow me to copy and paste, it did allow me to generate a report in some other tab. That I could then, I had the whole list and you can kind of copy and paste, you can put that into a spreadsheet or you can make it into a PDF. So then you all have that resource and can share it It's something like a Google Drive, or if you want to post it to your Blackboard or whatever. So then you all in that class session created something that you can come back and reference, or you're like, oh, what were they talking, like the HIV medication, what is that called? I'm not sure, or what's that article? And you can kind of crowdsource that information. So I thought that was kind of a fun way to think about engagement. Awesome. Okay, so next we're going to get into Kaltura, which seem to be pretty popular, what people seem to be interested in. And its features, limitations, some how-tos about playlists, quizzes, quiz analytics, and captions, as well as ideas for implementing the tool as well. So just an overview of some features that Kaltura provides that could be helpful to you. So all of your content is going to be in one place in the media center. So you're able to view all your videos there. You can make playlists there with several different videos. So if you're saying, you know, so I grouped together a bunch of videos about Poll Everywhere that are linked in the presentation and created a playlist, which I could then embed into Blackboard. So if you want to have students go through, okay, I only want to watch this section of this video. I only have 10 minutes right now to do this. I can't sit down for an hour and look through every one. They can do that. There's also the in-video quizzing function, where you can have students take a quiz throughout the course of a video to kind of check in for understanding. They can also be graded. As well as, so the Kaltura personal capture, so that's Kaltura's kind of latest release of their video capture system, which allows you to take screen shares, video of yourself, audio, as well as audio from videos that you play on your own computer, and as well as annotation tools, so being able to draw on whatever you're sharing. As well as some captioning tools. It's a pretty important part of engagement, but also students with different needs being able to caption videos. There's the automatic, and there's also human translated captions available. So just to give you an overview of what it actually looks like, because the tool did recently change. So it's pretty straightforward, looks more straightforward than the previous iteration. It's a big red button for recording, as well as the camera screen. If you have several monitors, you can select which ones you would like to share, as well as audio, and search for, this is what it comes up as, the icon. All right, so and a number of these slides I kind of went through and just took screenshots of what it looks like when you're within Kaltura, so hopefully it will be useful to you when you try and go back and figure that out on your own, though it might not be the best use of time right now to go through every single step of creating a playlist. So it is fairly straightforward, and you are able to embed playlists, so we already kind of briefly talked about that as well. So this next slide I kind of broke up into pieces. So it's when we're talking about in-video quizzes, so this is what the beginning of a quiz in Kaltura will look like in the video function, unless you select it to be disabled. So I'll say, you're welcome, in this video you're going to get a quiz. It also allows you to disable this, but you're able to include a pre-test, so with all of the quiz questions that you're going to see throughout the quiz. But it's important to know, so they can't just, if you don't want them to be able to download it and take it other than during the video, you'd have to disable that. So you can choose from true-false question types, multiple choice, or a reflection point, which is just pausing the video and showing them a piece of text. If you want to recap a concept or highlight, these are important parts of this concept to know, or don't worry about this part of the concept, focus on this. And you can also add rationale for the correct answer in Kaltura quizzes. So you can also give them a hint and tell them the reason why this is the correct answer if maybe they don't get it correct. And it will also show up, so this is just the bottom of a Kaltura video. So along the bottom it's showing you where you are. And it's also showing you the little 1 is the first quiz question. So it'll show them throughout if they want to pace, okay, I'm going to get halfway through this and then continue on, or it'll show them where the quiz questions are. And so these are some of the details or the options that you have. So showing the welcome page, allowing the download of the questions list, which can be disabled, and being able to show scores or include answers. So if you do want to reuse the content and be aware of, okay, if I do show the scores, then they all know what the correct ones are, and that could be shared, obviously, or if someone takes it before someone else. So just being aware of those. All quizzes also have the option, so if you want to go back and see how individuals did, what the trends were on general questions, there's an analytics function that'll let you view how everyone did and look at individual users to see if they took it. You can also export the grades here from the Kaltura Video Center and then put them into Blackboard, so exporting it as a CSV file. And you can also integrate your quiz videos into Blackboard as well. So I went through and created, so some of the links in here are just short Kaltura videos that I created to show you, walking through the steps of once you're in Kaltura, what does it look like to integrate it, and the different buttons you would click, etc. So you are able to, so here's a screenshot from Blackboard, and you're building in some content. You can add it as an item, which you can put pretty much anywhere in Blackboard, and insert it via this tab, or you can also just insert Kaltura Media. It's all pretty integrated. It looks just like Kaltura, but in Blackboard. You can also, so when I was showing you the playlist back here, so the playlist, once you've created your playlist, you can click this button right here to get the HTML for this playlist, which you can then insert in a Blackboard item, which is right over here via the HTML button. So that's just showing you what then that playlist looks like once you've done that. Okay, and then Kaltura captions are also pretty straightforward. You're able to order them. So right now the feature's currently down, but there's a ticket open to resolve the issue with the automatic captions. So the automatically generated captions are about 80% accurate, or that's what they estimate. And you're also able to edit them once you have had them completed. So in this example, it's showing you, you're able to go to the actions dropdown from within Kaltura on your video and order those captions. And then you're able to see, so it'll pop up saying this is the estimated time. I think it's about 48 hours is the maximum time you would generally expect. And then once it is complete, it'll show you the date completed, and that you can then edit them as well. So this is just a sample video of what it looks like to have captions in a video and edit them. So it'll show you here on the left side moments when people are talking. So it'll show you what it thinks they were saying, and then you can go in and edit that portion of text specifically, which does make captioning a little bit easier, because if anybody's had to transcribe anything, it takes a very long time. It's very time consuming. It can be kind of frustrating. But this tool does let you to go back and forth to particular points and in sentences, go to the beginning of the sentence, the end of the sentence, or select certain sentences to work on. So if maybe these ones are correct, but it's just one or two of them that aren't really coming out right, you can go back to those specific points in time and edit them, which I thought was pretty helpful. So that makes it a little bit easier, and it could potentially partially eliminate the need for having a human live translating or having that turnaround time. All right. So these are just some general kind of ideas for Kaltura that other members of staff kind of came up with or use in their own courses, or kind of ideas that were out on the internet generally. So obviously Kaltura will allow you to have your students go at their own pace. If you want to post modules, post review items, for example, for them to go over. Facilitate something like a flipped classroom format, which we'll talk about in a second. So delivering content that isn't necessarily, which you can easily look at in written or video form ahead of time, and then coming to class prepared to do some more hands-on activity or discussion, etc. More effectively managing class time, so kind of like the flipped classroom idea, being able to dedicate time in class to things you really need to be there for. As well, so if there are issues with attendance as far as maybe lecture content and people say, okay, if I can get the recording online, then I don't feel like I really need to go or I need to do something else, that could potentially combat that problem. As well as creating the review content, working through some calculations or tough concepts. So Abby and Rachel also talked about the idea of this is something that they can use to save them time and save their students time. And they've gotten really good feedback from their own students about this is something that is challenging and it helps me to have this module. As well as, so if you have a canceled day, you can use that as a kind of a makeup, and reusing video from year to year. So if if you're covering this similar concept in your course every semester, you have that piece of content you've created until you want to get rid of it. So you can go back and edit it. If you want to add in things like quizzes, you can. So it's something that helps to save you time going back and thinking about how can I maybe improve this for my students given that feedback that I got. Yeah.
On the flipped classroom concept.
Yeah.
I think, and this is more way for everybody who's TM coordinators, how does that play into our teaching hours? Because if you're doing, say, a 30 or 40-minute video, does that almost replace an hour of lecture in the classroom? I know the goal is so that they'll come prepared. But won't students say, oh, I watched an hour outside of class? Why? Does that make sense?
I can answer it.
Yeah, Laura.
I talked about this.
Yeah, I was going to speak to that.
This question. So based on the way things are structured, for each hour of in-class time, students are expected to prepare up to 3 hours outside of class time. So that's sort of the formula for that. So if you're having them, as long as your total preparation, like any readings that they might be doing, or in addition to watching a video or any other kind of sort of pre-class work that you might have assigned, as long as it doesn't exceed 3 hours for that 1 hour of in-class time, then you're still within your limits from a contact hour perspective. I would say be careful about how long some of those videos are, and think about, maybe kind of chunking the concepts. So if you have 2 or 3 things that you want them to review in advance, rather than making one big 40-minute video, maybe making 2 or 3 that are kind of shorter, that might center around like a central concept, and kind of having it set up as a playlist. And that gives them a little more flexibility of how they can watch the video as well. And also it can help them if they needed to review one of those concepts, it would be an isolated video instead of having to listen through or find where it was.
Can I just add?
Oh, sure.
Too. And I think the first point you have is lower level cognitive. They're just listening. So you use your class time for more. You can do your exercises for something. So think about gaining class time to apply there. Use it actively. Instead of lecturing. Say, oh, okay, what you listen to, let's do something with it.
I guess it makes complete sense, but how do you actually ensure that everyone, the students watching will come to class?
You may be able to use it as
So, yeah.
Even if it's a quiz function.
Yep.
Add that to old videos, or did you have to designate it from the start?
Yeah, so you can add it to any video that you currently have in your library. It kind of makes a copy of that video, and that makes it that video dash quiz. So it's separate from the original content. So if you want to use that other content in a different way, or chop it up, or make it, a different video, you still can. So the quiz is its own entity, and then you can edit the quiz once you've created that copy. Cool. Awesome. I think.
Can I ask a question? How did you get to one that they had 3 hours preparation for 1 hour?
Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Because
that
this is too much. If they have 5 lectures, they have to spend 15 hours to prepare for the day. Where do they sleep? Where do they have fun? Where do they eat?
So that came from the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, one of the assistant directors there. That's what sort of the 1 credit hour equals 15 hours. All those rules around contact time is the 3 hours of preparation for each hour.
Or could include after class study too. So for every hour you're in class, you're going to spend 3 hours either preparing or after class. Yeah, rehashing. So it's more of a contact time versus outside time. And so that's pretty much a standard in anything we read.
I don't think the students think of it in that way. But from a contact hour time for us, then that's sort of what we work with it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so as far as some best practices, like Laura talked about with the content hour issue, ensuring that you're using that time and being mindful of that time of the students going through and watching the videos. I did find this particular study that talked about some best practices from, like, interviewed some professors that implemented it in their courses, and saying, starting with, you don't necessarily need to make the whole class a flipped classroom right away, and starting with maybe a few different lectures, trying it out that way and seeing kind of the feedback from students as you go. And keeping the videos to 10 minutes or less, so maybe using that playlist function and breaking them up that way to ensure then you can come back to it at whatever point, or just find the content that you really want. So if you understand this particular concept but don't want to go fish through this 15-minute video to get to the point where you don't really understand, try and break up these concepts into smaller chunks. Also, considering ways to motivate students to complete out-of-class work. So kind of a negative side of the flipped classroom is that some professors were running into students that weren't being held accountable for making sure that they actually did listen, which then obviously hindered into their in-class discussion if they haven't, read the content or listened to the lecture. So potentially building in maybe a quiz, some way of being accountable there, as well as soliciting some student feedback. And there's a link there about a study that specifically talked to students and their perceptions of what flipped classrooms did for them, some of the positives and the negatives too. Generally seemed like a pretty positive thing. Since we're running a little low on time, I want to skip to some of the Poll Everywhere stuff. So all this stuff will be available to you as examples, just to give you an idea of some things that Poll Everywhere can do. So Poll Everywhere is really a real-time, potentially anonymous responses, although you can track if people are submitting Poll Everywhere responses from the web as opposed to from their phone, and also making sure you're selecting that only registered participants, so only people in my class are able to answer, so then you can also track it back as far as if you want to grade a multiple choice question in class, or if you want to grade participation, you can do that. Data can also be saved, gathered, and made into a report. So like I kind of pulled up earlier with here are all the things that we grouped together and created. You can also do that in a gradebook report if you want to say, okay, here are all my participation grades for the semester, who was able to check in or who got certain things right. You can do that. You can also weight grades with certain survey options. And you can collaborate with other users in Poll Everywhere to share different polls. Integrate in Blackboard, Google Slides, and PowerPoint, and integrate via the gradebook. So there are lots of different options that you can select with Poll Everywhere, which is helpful for if you're trying to assess different kinds of knowledge, if you want to do something like a competition, so the kind of Kahoot style quizzes, or you can separate users out into groups and have the leaderboard kind of situation if you want to do something like a review and see which groups are doing the best. As well as, so surveys work well if you want to do multiple questions and have them go at their own pace, so something like gaining feedback. And then you can also, so you can grade these two quiz options, the multiple choice and the clickable images. So just being aware of that if you do want to assess students' knowledge, or if you want to take a grade, making sure that it's one of those formats of questions, otherwise it doesn't integrate into Poll Everywhere's gradebook. There are lots of other examples that Poll Everywhere has down here as well to give you other ideas of ways that they use it, or other instructors have used different kinds of Poll Everywhere questions. And you can also, there's a lot of customization. You can change the colors. You can also change, so with open-ended questions, so if I wanted a word cloud, if it's something where people are putting up like, what does pharmacist mean to you? That might be a better option than like a cluster, for example, or like a text wall. And you can also choose different kinds of charts depending on what kind of questions you're asking. So it is customizable. But there are also limitations to Poll Everywhere. You can only use one poll at a time unless you're adding a sub-user to your account, which does require administrative privileges. There isn't a logic tree function, so if you're having student, skipping certain questions, so if they answered yes to this question, then they get skipped to question number 4, something like that. You're not able to do that in Poll Everywhere. It's really more of a live polling thing to get feedback in the moment as opposed to I want to send out a survey to 100 people. It can also be potentially distracting. So I was talking to Laura about, there's some issues with, students feel I don't want to have to go onto my phone because I was kind of like in the zone listening to a lecture or engaged, and now I'm on my phone checking my notifications. So I'm distracted in that way. So just knowing that it's not necessarily a cure-all, but a kind of a tool that you can use and knowing when it's going to be useful. And knowing that there are some limitations with only certain surveys are able to be graded, or certain types of questions are gradable. And we're also working on so there was an issue with some inconsistency between classrooms that we're working on with central IT to make sure all computers are consistent. So on PowerPoint add-ins, and the Poll Everywhere add-in is also available. All right.
And right now, Poll Everywhere is only for PowerPoint, or does it work for Google Slides?
It also does work for Google Slides. You just have to have under the add-ons Poll Everywhere, and then you log in, which in general should be working. If your personal computer hasn't installed the add-on for PowerPoint, for example, you might need to come by Partech and we can install that for you, but it's definitely possible. Yeah. Cool. So the reports function, I think, is a cool function of Poll Everywhere that people don't necessarily know about or utilize often. When I see Poll Everywhere, it's usually kind of like a one-off like survey or feedback kind of a tool, which it's useful for, but then you're also able to use this to kind of save this information or take a look at trends. So you can download it as a CSV file, so the gradebook, for example, or you can save it as a PDF. You do have to go to print and then save as PDF to do that, but it is possible. So I made a series of short videos for how do you do these things. If you have questions about how to do that, because I did get a couple questions about, okay, how do I insert a poll? I don't know, I'm not sure how to do that. So just showing you the step-by-step going through these processes, just some common questions. If you guys have other questions they haven't submitted via the Google Slides, feel free to email me. Email is in the very beginning of the slides, and we can kind of figure out a time to sit down and work through those. Cool. So some other ideas, just briefly, because we're coming to the end here. So Poll Everywhere, you can take attendance, and I linked a Poll Everywhere blog post that shows you how to go about doing that, because it's not an inherent feature. You can have to set up a poll, so you give them an attendance code for the day, and then if they answer it correctly, then they should be there, though it's not foolproof. Obviously, there are ways to get around those things, but just some kind of general guidelines or like practice, for example. So, and also it's a good discussion starting point, doing things like think, pair, share, and then maybe having them anonymously submit what they came up with, or if they're confused, but then not having to say that, I don't understand this concept, and maybe feeling embarrassed, or if it's maybe a more sensitive topic and you don't feel comfortable sharing, or it's difficult for students to feel like they want to interject because they could say the wrong thing, that could potentially be a starting point, but also being aware that you can then, if there is an answer that is not appropriate or is insensitive or is like a teaching moment, then you can also kind of check back and see, okay, they submitted by the web and I can take a look and see as an instructor who said that. So you have some level of control there, as well as responses over time with the reports function. And this is just kind of an overview of Qualtrics. Qualtrics is like a whole nother beast as far as learning how to use it as a tool, but it does have other capabilities that might be useful to you. It's just differentiating between Qualtrics is a whole different thing than Poll Everywhere, though it is also a survey tool, but it might have some capabilities that could be useful for you as far as like research is concerned, or this concept that I found called serious games, kind of designing like walkthroughs or like, so orienting a game through a survey, like, you know, choose your own adventure kind of thing that you can implement in the classroom as a learning tool. So for decision making. All right. So that was pretty much all I had for you guys today. I also wanted to give a shout out to everybody who kind of helped inform this a little bit, because I'm super new and I don't have a lot of experience with what you guys are doing in the classroom, especially since we're winding down a little bit. So appreciate all the direction from everybody who helped me out, helped me figure out some of the pull everywhere add-in stuff, and making sure that that's all consistent for you all, and just kind of feeling out what your needs are. So I appreciate you guys all coming. And if you guys have any feedback for me that you could submit via Poll Everywhere, I would appreciate that too. And I can take a look at it, make a report, save it for my own purposes. Thank you guys for coming. Please let me know if you have any other questions.
And again, I have the session feedback forms if you want to do anything.